Okay, Sean, your newest book is called A Rebel's Manifesto. I'm a rules follower, so I'll be like, "Oh, I'm not gonna be a rebel." But that's not what you mean. What is this manifesto and why must we rebel?
Well, when we think of a rebel, we typically think of those who would maybe follow a certain kind of rock music, fight the system, fight some injustice, stand up in rebellion, be a contrarian. Well, the question that's interesting to ask is, what would it mean to actually be a rebel today?
Mm,
Because a lot of the rebel in the past, you go through the 60s and 70s and even 80s and 90s, was rebelling in some way against a larger kind of conservative system that was in place.
yeah.
Now, what does it mean to be a contrarian? I would argue it's actually flipped.
Right.
That the rebel today is someone who says, you know what, I'm not going to cancel you. I'm
Yeah.
not going to just retweet something that makes somebody look bad without doing my homework. I'm not going to attack you. I'm actually going to try to show kindness and civility and love. That's ironically
Yeah.
the contrarian today. So, by calling this a Rebel's Manifesto, I'm telling people to rebel, but
Right.
really rebel in the way that Jesus rebelled. He had a commitment to truth and he was willing to die for that commitment. And he did die for that commitment. But what does Paul say in Romans 2? He says, it's your kindness that
Mm,
leads to repentance. On the cross, Jesus says to the thief, to me, this is almost an argument for the deity of Jesus.
mm.
He says, Father, forgive them. They know not what they do. The thing that cancel culture lacks is forgiveness because we want to cancel people.
Yeah.
Yet that's the heart of the Christian faith. So I'm just encouraging people. There's really nothing new about this, but culturally, what's happened is the rebel is somebody who says, you know what, I'm going to understand you first. I'm going to see the good in you. I'm going to find common ground. I'm not going to compromise truth.
Yeah.
I'm going to speak in a way that's loving and gracious and kind. That's the rebel today. And that's actually what we need more of in the Christian faith.
And isn't that beautiful? That's something you can teach your kids. Like when there is a
Mm.
disagreement, that we show graciousness. Talk about that, how two people can disagree, but still like each other. Because today it's like, oh, we disagree. We must be enemies. But that's not what we want to teach our children.
I love this question because this is what I try to do in private, but also publicly on my YouTube channel. Is
Yeah.
I've had conversations with a number of different atheists. I've had progressive Christians on, and I would argue that many progressive Christians believe a different gospel. And I've had them on to have a civil but substantive conversation. I've had an advocate on of the LGBTQ movement. She called herself, her title was one of the OG lesbian YouTubers, has a massive following.
Yeah.
And we had a civil conversation. We
Mhm.
found common ground. I recently had on he titled himself somewhat tongue in cheek, an atheist New York media elite. He writes for the New York Times,
Yeah.
writes for the Atlantic. And it's clear there's some issues where he and I differ. Oh,
Yeah.
he mentioned marriage,
Mhm.
abortion. Like, I'm going to fight for natural marriage and fight for the unborn.
Yeah.
But we just listened to each other. We
Mhm.
found common ground. We tried to be charitable and build a relationship.
Yeah.
And so often we fought the culture war, which in many ways sets up a straw man of somebody else's view.
Mhm.
We do it to the other side, they do it to us. But when we sit down in conversation with people and are just willing to listen, which I think is one of the best ways to love people
Mhm.
today, then we're being Christ to
Yeah.
them. We're being Christ to them. And I think some people are afraid to do this because they feel like if I listen and don't correct somebody, I'm affirming it. I'm like, nonsense.
Yeah.
That listening, I mean, my dad said to me, oh, son, it's
Yes.
more important to understand
Mhm.
than to be understood.
Mhm.
And I'm an apologist, Arlene. You know this.
Right.
I'm always up for
Right.
a
Like
good
you're going to be like,
argument
I
and a
want to
good
speak the truth.
debate.
Yeah.
I enjoy a good debate. It's actually fun to me.
Mhm.
But if I ask myself the question, how do I love other people? I think a huge posture is starting with some humility, with listening and understanding. And then the Bible says, be
Yeah.
ready with an answer when people ask in 1 Peter 3:15. So I try to model this for my kids. They've seen me
Yes.
do it. They've also seen me blow it and then
Right.
apologize and own it,
Right.
which is fine. That's a
Yeah.
part of the process.
Yeah, because
It's a
human
part of the
emotion is
process.
there. I mean, you might get all riled up in a moment and be like, "Oh, I need to apologize about that." This is so good
Yeah.
because an elementary school child can learn this, a middle schooler, a high schooler, a college student, that this is the way you engage a conversation, and it doesn't mean that you are affirming the position, which I love what you said. In the book, there's a cost here for kids, and all my kids have
Mm.
been in public school from K through 12 here in San Diego. We were fortunate enough in elementary school. We ran a Bible club at the elementary school at our zenith. We maybe had 110 kids in there on Fridays after school. It was amazing. But they've been in that environment. And you open your book, A Rebel's Manifesto, with this girl named Jana, who is in a college psychology class. She is asked to review, like for a grade, like this porn film. And I just want you to talk about that because that's what the parents are wondering. Like, what in the world is my child supposed to do when they're put in this situation? Like, how can we equip this child to be put in this situation?
Yeah, she was on university campus, and part of her grade was to just watch and analyze a porn film. Now, some people think that would never happen. I've had multiple of my students graduate and say this. Our culture has become so pornified
Yeah.
that in a classroom, they're like, well, we just have to analyze this and talk about this academically. Well, she was torn because she didn't want to watch this and knew that it was wrong, but didn't want her grade to suffer. And the teacher's like, sorry, if you don't watch it, you're going to get docked to your grade. So turns out she called up my dad, and my dad he's just so creative. He
Yeah.
says, why don't you say to your professor, ask your professor if he
Yeah.
would allow you to present a case to the class of why you shouldn't have to watch this
Mhm.
and why porn is destructive to society. He goes, sure. And he goes, if I accept it, I'll let you out of the assignment. And she does. My dad gives her a ton of research. He's like a research guru.
That's great.
And she makes this presentation, and he goes, he's like, I accept it. That was better than I thought. Good for you.
Yeah.
And said, anyone else who doesn't watch this can leave as well. And, according to the report that went to my dad, about half the kids stood up and walked out.
It's amazing. It's
Now,
amazing.
some things to take away. I share the story in the book and I open with it because we have to have these conversations with our
Mhm.
kids before that happens.
Yeah.
Because if they're sitting there on a college campus, their grade is on the line, maybe a scholarship, their reputation, maybe a part of them is like, maybe I kind of want to watch this and I'm looking for an
Mhm.
excuse. It's only if we've taught them, like Daniel, who
Yes.
determined in his heart not to defile himself.
Mhm.
That's past tense.
Yep.
Daniel had a certain character in place before the temptation to eat
Mhm.
the undefiled food. Jana had a certain character in place before the temptation to watch this. So, part of what I'm trying to do is give parents a tool to have these conversations with their kids before these temptations and issues come,
Yeah.
so they have a filter and a character to process them in a Christian fashion. And by the way, really quickly, I'm in
Mhm.
California like you are, a little
Yeah.
north in Orange County.
Mhm.
I have read all of the sexual health standards for California. And I'm telling you, Arlene, you know this from
Mhm.
kindergarten all the way up in public schools. There are intentional
Yeah.
ways of the books that are read, the guest speakers that are brought in, posters on the wall, lessons. And I don't use this word lightly, but to indoctrinate our
Yeah.
kids in a worldview about sex and gender identity that does fly in the face of Christian ideas.
Yeah. Okay, so if we're gonna, this is, everyone's leaning in and perked up now. So we're talking to our kids before. And I love that you said pre-decide because that's even just a couple podcasts back. We talked about pre-deciding about devices like
Mm,
Daniel. We're going to pre-decide what are we going to allow? What are we not going to allow? When are we going to give the smartphone? All those things. We are very rebellious because my senior and my sophomore,
good.
when my seventh grader, no smartphones, no social media. It's just, something we've decided to put off.
Good
But
for
lots of
you.
technology, but just not those things. So, what does that parent do when they think, what should should I pull my kids out of the school? Should I be vocal at my school board? What are some options that parent has?
So I'm not going to tell parents that they
Yeah.
need to homeschool, private school, or
Mhm.
public. And some people don't have the ability to homeschool. Some
Right.
people don't want to.
Yeah.
Some people don't have the funds or ability to send their kids to a private
Yeah.
school, or maybe a private school is not that good in the area.
Right.
So we have to work with what we have.
Mhm.
So, and even public schools are different. I've seen some
Mhm.
principals that really mitigate some of this gender ideology
Yeah.
and just do a better, fair job than others.
Mhm.
So, my first advice is to go in and build relationships
Mhm.
with your kid's teacher, with a principal.
Yeah.
Build relational capital with them. I've been
Mhm.
reading First Peter and it says love
Yes.
covers a multitude of sins.
Yeah, that
If
goodie
there's
bag from Costco that goes to the
Yep.
office, that goes a long way.
It does,
It
and
does.
it's not just in a manipulative fashion, but
Yeah.
you wanna honor and care and love, so when
Yes.
these issues come up, you have some understanding and relational capital
Yeah.
to speak into this. That's number
Yep.
1.
So good.
Number 2 is you gotta build a relationship with your kids so you can have these
Mhm.
conversations, and then just be asking your kid in regular conversation, the right way and the right time, "What's going on at school? What are you learning?" Pay attention to their homework, and then when it comes to if something is really being taught
Mhm.
that you are concerned about,
Yeah.
whether it's on all sorts of issues, sexuality or history, or people have concerns about certain issues tied to race that are being taught,
Mhm.
then you go in and you stand up for it.
Yeah.
But in a sense, that's a last resort.
Mhm.
But it's the way we do that that's
Mhm.
honoring, that's committed to truth, that doesn't demonize the other side that
Yeah.
concerns me. So, bottom line, a public school
Yes.
parent, have relationship with the kids,
Mhm.
be involved, be engaged, build a relationship with the parent, know what's going on, and also teach your kids a Christian
Mhm.
worldview so they have a filter to make sense of these ideas that are coming to them.
Yeah, it's so good.